disgruntledduck.com.
Hey again guys, right, so today we're actually going to make a model. As I said in a previous video, someone's asked me more of if I can do a how-to on things, so I'm going to take you through building your first tank model. For this one we're using this Tamiya kit, quite a nice simple kit to start with. And basically what I want to do is I don't want to use anything advanced or any tools or paints you're not going to have, so I'm going to basically use what you would get in one of the gift sets. I've got my basic tools, which we've done a video on. So I've got one pair of clippers. I'm using a single file, the one with the curved side and the flat side. I've got my craft knife, using my simple pair of jewellery tweezers. I'm going to use the real basic masking tape for this. I don't know if I'm going to need it on this kit, but I've got my plastic putty just in case. Then basically what I'm going to use from a gift set is I'm going to use the basic Reval glue that you get with most of the gift sets these days. I'm going to use the double-ended paintbrush you get. I'm interested how this is going to go because they're quite fat tips, but we'll see what we can do, you know. And I've got some basic Humbrol paints. I've just got what I've got, you know, so I've got my matte white, I've got a gloss black because I don't have a flat black in Humbrol, so we're not going to spend any money we don't need to. I've got a green, a yellow and a red brown. The great thing is, especially with armour models, it doesn't really matter, you know, as long as you've got the basic colours, we can add a bit of black, we can add a bit of white to strengthen or weaken them. And again, we're going to do a bit of weather on it, so not a problem there. I've also got, it's not a Humbrol one, simply because I didn't have a Humbrol silver, I didn't want to spend any money, but I had this already in the stash. It's a shining silver, so that's going to be for our tank tracks and a bit of our chipping. The other things I've got, of course, a little bit of tissue paper, we're going to need that. I've got a white primer in a rattle can. I've got a gloss varnish in a rattle can, and I've got a matte varnish in a rattle can. The reason I've chosen to go with these is because they are pretty cheap. You're going to get a load of use out of them. Even if you build your first model and don't like the hobby, you're still going to get use out of these rather than buying the specialist ones for modelling. These three I think cost me around £5 for the free from a discount store, so it's not breaking the bank. Final things I've got is I've got a wet palette. So I've made a video on how to make one of these for pretty much for free. That's going to help us with our painting later, especially when mixing our colours. And the last thing is I've just got a little tub of dish soap water. So basically warm water, a bit of washing up liquid, and I've got an old toothbrush. So you're going to see where that's going to come into play. So right, first thing we do, we open up our kits. Now, I've already done a review, an open box on this one, so you can check that out. So, you know, people always start different ways. They start different things. Some people like to wash everything in there. This was more a problem back in the old days. They used a mould release agent on the plastic, which meant it was more difficult to paint over. That's not so relevant nowadays. With some of the smaller companies it might still be, with resin parts definitely. The other thing I'm going to wash is the tracks. Reason being, these are a pain in the arse to paint. There's definitely a release agent on there, so that's what our soapy water's for. So those guys are going to go in there, just wash them off quickly, and that's going to get any of our release agent off. So leave them in there, do that. Then I'm going to rinse them off and just leave them to dry while I get on with the rest of the model. So I've put them to one side. So for me, what I like to do first is take my instruction book out and go through the stages of the build. The wheels specifically, the cogs I'll put in one go together, but the wheels usually, especially on German tanks, are two-tone. So you're going to have the rubber outside part of the road wheel, and then the central part is going to be painted the colour of the tank, or it's going to be painted in camo. So what I do with these is paint these two halves separately before assembly, whereas the stuff I'm going to assemble. This is also the time to go through and see if there's any small parts on the tank that need to be painted a different colour. I like to paint my tank in one go, and then for instance it's usually this section here. So all of these bits are going to be a different colour, the tools. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take them off the sprue, I'm going to prime them, I'm going to paint them, and then I'm going to fix them right at the end of the build. But apart from that, it seems to be a quite smooth looking build. I can't see, I'm looking upside down, but I can't see anything here that looks too crazy. So yeah, we're just going to get on with the basics. So if we start off with our wheels. So this is our real basics of modelling. So you take your clippers and you want to get as close as possible to the edge, make a cut. As close as possible to our edge, make our cut. Right, now this is where we start to use other tools. So you can see we've cut this little burr there. You can see that. So this way we just start, take either our knife or our file, and just gently, we don't want to go crazy on it, you know. Some people absolutely hate this. I've seen people, especially guys who make planes and that, and they're like, oh, I'm going to make a tank, and they spend 3 hours sanding wheels and they're just done with it. For me, I love it, you know. This is the most relaxing part of my day, you know. Being a chef, it's quite busy and high pressure, so I can just sit here, I can put an episode of Star Trek on, or a double bill of The Simpsons, and just sit there, sand wheels, and forget about anything that's wrong with the world. So there you go, there's your first wheel sanded. So what I'm going to do with this video, I'm not going to show you everything stage by stage. I'm just going to sand the rest of these now, and then come back once I've sanded the wheels, and we'll get on with the next little bit. I've just moved on to some of the cogs now. So basically the wheels I've got here, they're all been trimmed, sanded. These are trimmed and sanded. But with the cogs, so they always join part of the cog onto the sprue. If you can see it just there, it extends outwards. So for these ones, I like to flip them over and just use my craft knife, just trim them back like that rather than sands. Because usually if you run your craft knife down, you can feel where the edge is. And then that gives us a nice clean finish all the way around without the need for sanding. So I just wanted to show you on the cogs, we've got our wheels have all been trimmed off now with the help of my beautiful assistant and sanded down. So the cogs, these are so easy to mess up because they always connect the sprues, if you can see there and there, onto the edge of the cog. So for these ones I like to flip them over and just take my craft knife. You can usually feel where it is and just gently saw through it. I've got one more there. Gently saw through it, flip it over, and just finish that curve around with the file, you know, and you've got straight away your cog looks nice and uniform rather than the parts sticking out. So yeah, I just wanted to show you this piece. So it's quite, I'm getting quite easy into all these guys. Bosch. This one, the way they've put this number in, I can't get a really tight cut on there. So it's a great thing because your cutters are beveled. We just switch them around, cut that. It leaves us a little bit more flash there that we're going to need to clean up, but at least we're not going to actually damage the part on that. Another thing to look at, especially this is a prime example. Alright, so can you see there's a line all the way down there, and that runs all the way around the piece. So that line shouldn't be there. That's just part of the casting process. Where the two moulds shut together, you get a little gap in between where the plastic pushes out when they're cast. So for this one, we can either use our file and file it off, but I personally prefer you to use my my blade. just gently scratch, you know, you don't need to put too much pressure on. You see people all the time, I see on the forums and Facebook especially, people chunks out of themselves with a knife. You don't need to do that. You shouldn't be pressing too hard with your knife. You just need to, you know, I mean, it's the same thing with chefing. You need a sharp blade. If you don't have a sharp blade, you're going to injure yourself. So just scratch that away, and you can see on the blade where the bit of plastic's come off, you know, and you can see already that line's gone. You know, with just the least bit of effort, finish it off with our little file, and that's done. You know, and that's the difference. You know, you could build this without doing that, but when you start doing that, that's when you start to excel, and you start to end up with a, you know, if you start off with a good finish on the actual plastic, when you start to paint it and you start to finish it, because you've got the good base, you're always going to have a better looking model. I've stuck together this little part, and this is the exhaust. So this is a little pro tip for you. You're going to get, as you move on through the hobby, you're going to understand a little bit more about parts, and especially when you're weathering things, you want them to have a certain look. So as we're going to do this model as a weathered model, we're not going to do it straight out of the factory. We want it to have a little bit of colour to it and a little bit of it's going to look used. Now, one thing, these exhausts get really rusty really quickly. Now, if you know about rust, you know it's flaky. It's not a smooth thing. So the way we're going to recreate this, we're going to use a bit of our glue. So generally, I would use Tamiya extra thin glue or a poly cement, which is clear and liquid. But you need to understand a bit about the glues we use in modelling. Now, they're not glues in the sense of a regular glue that sticks two things together like a PVA glue or whatnot. With these poly cements, they actually eat away at the plastic. So what you're doing is you're basically melting the plastic, and as it sets, the two parts of plastic make a new join and actually weld together. So what we can do with this is I'm going to bring the box over. It's always great with these because you can squirt a load out in one go, so it's a good idea to practice. You just need the tiniest little squeeze on that and the blob's going to come out. So what I want to do is take a bit of that on my finger. You probably shouldn't use your finger, but I want to rub that over my exhaust, right? And it's already, I can already feel that starting to eat away at the plastic. So I'm going to put a little bit more on, be quite liberal with it. Right, and as you can see, you see that has already changed the texture of it. Yeah, it's basically melted that plastic. Alright, and that's already a nice rough feel to it. So I don't want to do these bits, the braces that hold it on, I just want to get the actual cylinder. So rub a bit on there, rub a bit on here. Again, this is something you definitely want to do in a bit of a ventilated area because it can stink a little bit, especially when you're using a lot of this stuff. So if you can get yourself a mask or something, that's always excellent. I'm not wearing one just at the moment, but when I use my primer later, I'll definitely be having a mask on to save my lungs. So yeah, we've already got a bit of a rough finish, so I'm just going to go over quite hard while it's still tacky. You know, because we can use our file to make things smooth, we can also use our file to make things a bit rough. So if you can see that now, so that's a clean piece of plastic as it was, and if you can see that next to it, you can already see I've got a nice rough finish. So when I start to apply some paints later, that's going to pop through, especially when because we're going to use a technique called dry brushing to go over the top, and that should really pick out some of that roughness on there. So right, so we're going to leave that for a minute, and we're going to start fitting up this little guy. So one of the nice things about the Tamiya kits as well, I don't know if you can see on the instructions, your parts are pretty much easily labelled on here. So for instance here, you got your parts 1 to 10, you got your parts 11 to 13, and they go in order. Some of the other brands of kits, I think I was making an ICM model the other day, they will just put them anywhere on the sprue. So you might have part 1 over here, you might have part 2 over here. They just squeeze as much as they can onto those sprues. But luckily with the Tamiya one, we don't have too much trouble. So what we're doing right now is we're going to be working on this little section here. We've already made the exhaust there, which is 4 parts. We're letting that set up for a minute. We've done a little bit of weathering at this stage on it. So right, next we're going to work on this. So we're definitely going to need some tweezers for this guy. And yeah, we just follow the instructions. So always as well, in between, if you're using this type of glue, make sure you put that that cap on, otherwise the glue sets inside that and it's an absolute pain to try and get it out. So yeah, we'll just do a little bit at a time, a little blob on there. Again with this, less is definitely more, you know. You can always, this is exactly the same with cooking, you can always add, but you can never take away. So we're just going to line our pieces up now. And again, don't be afraid on this to just take as much time as you need to get it right. It's better to take 30 minutes and to get it right than to take 5 minutes and to get it wrong. I mean, at the minute, these parts are all aesthetic, you know, these are just to make it look good. But when you're fixing parts, they're going to need to fix onto other parts at a later stage in the build. If you don't get things wrong, especially when you're building at these sort of scales, if something's off by a millimetre, it's just not going to work at all. So right, next part, here's my little satchel. Again, just tiny bit of glue, and just use the needle. So you can see our basic things. If you need, get your knife, gently reposition things, you know, if you're not as comfortable with your tweezers. But yeah, I'm gonna get on with it. I'm not gonna show you every single tiny little bit I'm doing, but as you can see, for the more detailed work, you know, a lot of the time I use a magnifying glass as well, so don't be ashamed to pick up a magnifying glass, get in there with that. But yeah, we're gonna crack on with this little bit, fit these other small little parts with the tweezers, and yeah, come back to the next little part of the build. Right, so we've done now this part of the rear of the tank, and we've got our exhaust there. So this is now on to the next stage. So I'm not going to fit that, even though it says in the instructions. Reason being, this is going to be one colour, and this is going to be all rusted up. So what I want to do is paint this and then assemble this right at the end. It's going to slip in nice and easily to there, so we don't have a problem with fitting. So yeah, person filming asked me what should you do instead of using your finger to rough up that paint? So if you take a piece of sprue, cut it at an angle, give this guy a bit of a sand, you're going to create a nice little flat face there. So you can now use this edge to go over, and we could have applied our glue with that. With the Tamiya extra thin cement, the glue comes with a brush in it, so you would have just brushed it over and then roughed it up afterwards. But when we're using this one, you know, ideally you don't want to get this stuff on your skin. So that's that. We put that to the side for a minute, and then we move back onto our wheels. So most tanks come with these little guys, poly caps. It goes back to the old days that a lot of these, and I can show you right here, a lot of these models used to be motorised. So as you can see, this is a throwback from it. This is where the batteries would have gone. There's a little bit of engine in there, and basically with these little rubber caps on, the wheels can move freely through. So they pop into the centre with a little bit of help into all these little guys, and then we're going to put our outside on that. Same with these. As I said before, we're going to do the same with these, the road wheels, but we're going to wait until they're painted, just because we're going to be painting two colours on there. But yeah, so that's the next little stage. We've done the back. It's moving along quite well. So the next stage we're going to be doing is, after that, we're going to start fitting the bottom parts of the hull, move on to the cannon, top of the hull, and then we're going to get ready for painting and priming. So yeah, we're actually moving along quite well with this build. So basically, right, we're doing the poly caps, and just something you need to notice. When you cut these off, you're left with a tiny little bit of plastic on there, and that's very important. You cut that off, otherwise it's going to fit in there, but then the top of that wheel's not going to fit on top. So ideally, when they come off, cut it off there and then. Worst case scenario, we can actually just trim it off when it's on there. But yeah, that's one thing, definitely. Right, so now we're on to the next stage. We're going to start assembling the base of the hull. So one thing, I've hopped ahead and I've glued the gun barrel. Simple reason is this, the cement can take a little while to set. So pretty much always, unless you're buying the aftermarket metal barrels, when you're using these plastic barrels, you're always going to get a little bit of line on the side. So I want to sand that down. But as you've seen, when I did this, if you sand as soon as you've applied glue, it's going to wreck it. So I'm going to let that glue set out. I'm going to put that to the side, and then sand that down afterwards. So the first thing, we've got our rear panel. That is now set, and that's good to work with. So best thing on this is always do a dry fit first. So what that means is fit it without using glue. So we just want to see if everything's going to line up, how that's going to fit in, and if sometimes you might need to sand a little bit, sometimes you don't. So straight away on this, you know, usually with Tamiya you're going to get quite a nice fit, but what I can see is, I'll use my knife to show you. There's a gap in there, there's a gap in there. So once we've glued this in place, we're going to want to put a little bit of filler in there, a little bit of filler in there. Also, they're really good with this sort of thing, you know. They make it really easy for you to fit things. So, you know, you've got your cut out there, you've got your cut out there. It's really hard to screw up a Tamiya kit. You have to actually work hard to mess this thing up. So we know they're going to go in nicely. One other thing to note is, especially when you're cutting pieces off beforehand, they look pretty similar, but as you can see, these parts are facing opposite directions. So just make sure when you're fitting, follow the instructions to the T. The amount of times I've fitted pieces like this and I've ended up an hour or two later when the glue's set trying to get them off because they're in the wrong place. So I'm not going to go now and show you me gluing every single part of that. I've shown you, you know, basically how to glue on that, so you know what you're doing. Less is more with this. So I'm going to run through this model now. I'm going to follow the instructions. As I mentioned before, all these tools and that, I'm not going to fit these now. So anything that needs to be painted a different colour from the body of the tank, I'm not going to fit. I'm going to omit these cement blocks. They give you the options to add them or not. For this one, I'm not going to put them on. So the next place you find me is I should be up to this stage. Again, I'm not going to fit these on the side. I'm going to paint them and then fit them. I'm not fitting the tracks in this order either. So yeah, the next stage, most of this should be built, and we can start thinking about the priming and the painting. So this, if you come down here, is pretty much a finished model. Test fitted the side skirt on it. We've just gone through the instructions, follow them, and as you can see, our test skirt pops off. That's just all dry fitted now, so we can now take off this, take off our wheels, etc, etc. And then another little tip, we're going to give this all a coat of white primer, but we're going to do it individually. So for my wheels, I've stuck a couple of pieces of masking tape face up, a couple of pieces to hold them in place. Just going to stick all my wheels along there. So when I spray them, they're going to move around anywhere. On the bottom strip, as I said before, I've got all my little pieces. They're going to fit on the side of the tank, but they're going to be painted a different colour. So I can just stick them all in this one. Same thing again, we're going to give it a nice coat of primer, let it dry, flip them over onto another piece, and it's going to make it a lot easier rather than fiddling around. With this guy, again, a nice coat of white primer all over. We might lose the ability for the cannon to lift up and down, but that's not a massive problem. And yeah, that's basically the build. You know, we've taken those little tips and tricks, used our tools as we should have done, and next we're going to be on to painting up this bad boy. So yeah, I think I'm going to make that into another video, just because this one might be a bit long if I add it all into one video. But I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you've learnt the basics, so hopefully you should be able to knock these out of the park in a few days. So until next time, happy modelling. I'll see you later, and yeah, join me again.
Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, give the video a thumbs up and leave a comment.